Throughout the centuries, much has been said about the figure of the last pope, and one of the most discussed texts on this subject is the so-called prophecy of the popes attributed to Saint Malachy. This prophecy has captured the attention of both believers and skeptics, who debate its authenticity and the fulfillment of its predictions. We will analyze the historical events that could coincide with the predictions and the modern interpretations about the last pope. Let's begin with the biography of Saint Malachy. He was an Irish archbishop known for his piety, his austere life, and his dedication to the reform of the Church in Ireland. He was born in the city of Armagh, in 1094 in Northern Ireland, and from a young age showed a deep religious vocation. He was educated in a local monastery, and throughout his life he stood out as a spiritual leader committed to the purity of faith and the strengthening of ecclesiastical discipline. He was ordained a priest and, later, was appointed Bishop of Connor, one of the most important dioceses in Ireland at that time. During his episcopate, he dedicated himself to improving the religious life of his people and combating the corruption and laxity that affected the Irish Church. His focus on reform was key to the resurgence of monastic discipline and the promotion of Christian life on the island. One of the most outstanding achievements of his life was his visit to Rome in 1139, where he was received by Pope Innocent II. It was during this time that, according to tradition, Saint Malachy would have received the famous prophecy of the popes, which describes the successive popes until the end of the world, although its authenticity remains a subject of debate. He died in 1148 at the age of 54 in a monastery in France. He was canonized in 1190 by Pope Clement III due to his holiness of life, his efforts to reform the Church, and his influence on the religious life of his time. His feast day is celebrated on November 3rd. Throughout the centuries, Malachy has been venerated as one of the great saints of Ireland. This prophecy of the popes is a series of 112 phrases or mottos that supposedly describe each pope from the papacy of Celestine II, in the early 12th century, to the last pope, who would mark the end of times. It is believed that these descriptions were given to Saint Malachy during his visit to Rome, although the prophecy was not published until the late 16th century, which has raised doubts about its authenticity. The prophecy is composed of 112 mottos, each of which corresponds to a particular pope, reflecting some characteristic or significant event of the pontificate of the pope to whom it refers. The descriptions begin with Pope Celestine II, who assumed the papacy in 1143, and continue until the last pope, whose mandate would represent the end of the papacy and the Church, according to the most apocalyptic interpretation of the prophecy. The descriptions of the popes in the prophecy are highly symbolic and enigmatic, which allows for multiple interpretations. Some of the descriptions seem to refer to historical events, personal characteristics, or even aspects of papal names. For example, some phrases are clear and easy to associate with specific popes, while others are more ambiguous and difficult to interpret, which has given rise to speculation and debate throughout the centuries. This style has allowed the prophecy to be seen both as a true prophetic vision and as a literary or apocryphal work that plays with ambiguity and generality. The last motto of the prophecy refers to Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman, who, according to the most widespread interpretation, would be the pope who would govern during the fall of Rome and the end of times. The name Petrus is associated with the first pope, Saint Peter, and the title Romanus has generated controversy. Some believe that it refers to a pope originating from Rome, while others interpret that it could symbolize the last pope who would face great tribulation in the city. According to some apocalyptic interpretations, this pope would be destined to guide the Church in times of chaos, persecution, and the end of the era, before the arrival of the final judgment. Each of the 112 mottos refers to a specific pope and is often associated with significant characteristics or events of his pontificate. For example, some mottos refer to the names of the popes, their geographical origins, or personal traits, such as the color of their clothing, their activities, or their life prior to the papacy. The ability to link these descriptions with historical popes depends on the flexibility of the symbols used in the prophecy. Sometimes the motto seems to be clear, while other times the connection is more diffuse. Followers of the prophecy have identified both hits and misses in the descriptions. Some popes seem to coincide precisely with the predictions. For example, the motto De Labor Solis, from the labor of the sun, has been associated with Pope John Paul II, who was born on May 18, the day a solar eclipse was observed, and whose pontificate was marked by a great effort to promote peace and world unity. However, not all the mottos fit so well with the popes of history. In many cases, the descriptions are too vague or ambiguous to be linked with certainty to a particular pontiff. Some critics argue that the errors and the lack of clear coincidences invalidate the prophecy, suggesting that it was a later invention and not an authentic prediction. One of the main difficulties in interpreting the prophecy of the popes lies in the descriptions of the most recent popes, especially those who hold the pontificate in modern times. As the prophecy progresses towards the popes of the 20th and 21st centuries, the descriptions become much more vague and difficult to associate with the current papal figures. For example, the motto corresponding to Pope Francis, De Gloria Olivi, from the glory of the olive tree, has been interpreted in various ways, with some scholars suggesting that it refers to the order of Saint Benedict, from which the Pope comes, while others associate it with peace and hope. This ambiguity makes it complicated to make a clear connection between the mottos and the most recent popes, which fuels skepticism about the validity of the prophecy to predict the future. The prophecy of the popes has been the subject of widespread controversy about its authenticity, with arguments both for and against its medieval origin and the connection with Saint Malachy. This debate focuses on its publication date, the lack of contemporary evidence, and the possibility that the prophecy was created by a later figure. Defenders of the prophecy's authenticity argue that, since it is attributed to Saint Malachy, an Irish monk of the 12th century, the prophecy could have been written in medieval times. They assert that the details of the descriptions of the early popes seem to reflect events of that time and that the symbolic and enigmatic nature of the mottos corresponds to the literary style of the period. Some believe that the prophecy was a divine revelation that Saint Malachy received during his visit to Rome, which allowed him to foresee the future of the papacy. On the other hand, many critics point out that the prophecy of the popes was not published until 1595, almost 450 years after the death of Saint Malachy. The lack of contemporary evidence linking Malachy to the prophecy raises doubts about its authenticity. There are no historical documents or mentions in ancient records that support the idea that Malachy made such predictions. Furthermore, the prophecy appears at a time when the Church was going through political and religious tensions, which raises the possibility that it could have been a creation of a later author, perhaps for purposes of legitimization or prediction during a period of crisis. The key question in this debate is whether the prophecy was really written by Saint Malachy or whether it is an invention of a 16th-century monk. Some historians suggest that the prophecy could have been a literary work created during the Renaissance, possibly by a monk who sought to influence the events of the time. The fact that the first mottos seem to coincide with the historical popes closest to 1595 reinforces this hypothesis. One of the main questions is whether Petrus Romanus refers to a pope who is truly from Rome, or whether it is a deeper symbol. Some interpretations suggest that the term Roman could refer to a pope who has a direct connection with the city of Rome, that is, a pontiff who is Italian or who comes from that region. However, others argue that Roman should not be understood literally, but rather as a symbol of the last pope who will face great tribulation in Rome, which could allude to a moment of great crisis or destruction for the Church. Furthermore, some believe that the term Petrus refers to the Apostle Saint Peter, the first pope, suggesting that the last pope will be the one who closes the cycle initiated by Saint Peter. This gives a symbolic dimension to the term Petrus, suggesting that the pope mentioned could represent not only an earthly leader, but also an agent of spiritual change at the end of times. The figure of Petrus Romanus is linked to apocalyptic interpretations of the future of the Catholic Church. According to some readings of the prophecy, this last pope would be the one who would guide the church in times of great chaos and persecution, facing the fall of Rome and the collapse of the traditional structures of the church. In this context, the prophecy has been associated with theories about the end of the church, where the papacy would represent the last defense before a catastrophic event or the beginning of a new religious era. Some theorists claim that this last pope could be a leader who will challenge the established norms and lead the church in a period of purification and renewal. Others, however, interpret the prophecy as an announcement of the disappearance of the papacy as we know it, suggesting that the church could transform significantly or even face its extinction in its traditional form. Since the prophecy does not establish a clear deadline for this pope, some believe that the figure of Petrus Romanus is related to a future pontiff, one who will be elected in times of great turmoil or cataclysm for the church. Pope John Paul II. Some have proposed that Pope John Paul II could have been Petrus Romanus, due to his long pontificate and his global impact, especially for his focus on the defense of the faith and the fight against communism, which some interpreted as a harbinger of difficult times for the church. Pope Benedict XVI. Other theorists mention Pope Benedict XVI, especially for his unexpected resignation in 2013, an act considered by some as a symbolic step towards the final phase of the papacy. His resignation has been interpreted as a prelude to the end of the papacy as we know it. Pope Francis. Some also believe that the current Pope Francis could be Petrus Romanus, due to his pastoral approach and his challenge to the traditional structures of the church, which could be related to the idea of a pope who leads the church in times of crisis and transformation. Furthermore, his name, Francis, has been seen as a symbol of renewal and humility, which some interpret as a sign of the end times. Other prophecies about the last pope. The Fatima prophecy is one of the best-known events in the contemporary history of Catholicism, related to the visions that three shepherd children in Portugal, known as the Fatima Visionaries, claimed to have received from the Virgin Mary in 1917. This prophecy is composed of three secrets revealed gradually, and has been the subject of much interpretation, especially in relation to its connection to the end of times and the figure of the Pope. The third secret of Fatima was the last of the messages given by the Virgin Mary to the three children, and for a long time it was kept secret. This third secret was finally revealed in the year 2000 by the Vatican, although its interpretation remains a subject of debate. The message describes an apocalyptic vision in which the Pope is seen being attacked by a group of soldiers, which has been interpreted by some as a reference to the dangers that the Church could face in the end times. The vision includes a series of events of great suffering, which some interpret as a representation of the persecution of the Church and the possible crisis of faith in the future. This has led many to link the third secret of Fatima with the idea of the end of times or a period of tribulation for the Catholic Church, suggesting that the Virgin Mary was warning about times of great chaos and suffering for the faithful. The Pope plays a crucial role in the visions of Fatima, particularly in the third part of the secret. In this vision, the Pope is represented as a central figure who suffers as he walks towards his martyrdom. Some interpret this as a reference to the persecution that popes could face in future times, including the assassination attempt against Pope John Paul II in 1981, which many consider as a possible realization of the Fatima prophecy. The figure of the Pope in these visions has been seen by some as a symbol of the fragility of the Church in times of crisis, as well as the hope that faith will remain firm despite adversities. The prophecy of Nostradamus, the famous astrologer and doctor of the 16th century, is known for his enigmatic quatrains that have been interpreted in various ways throughout the centuries. Although his work covers many themes, one of the aspects that has generated the most controversy is his focus on the future of the Catholic Church and the popes, especially in relation to the end of the papacy and the destiny of the Church. Nostradamus, in his writings, did not focus exclusively on the Catholic Church, but many of his quatrains have been interpreted as allusions to religion, the papacy, and the crisis of faith. His apocalyptic visions include predictions of significant changes within the Church, often related to power struggles, corruption, and internal crises. Some scholars believe that Nostradamus anticipated the fall of traditional religious institutions and the arrival of difficult times for the popes, in which the Church would be tested by internal and external conflicts. In this context, it has been interpreted that Nostradamus predicted the fall of the Church in its current form or a radical transformation of it, associating the events of his time with a future in which the papacy would suffer great tribulations. One of Nostradamus's best-known quatrains, and one that has been widely discussed in relation to the end of the papacy, is the following. The great city will be undone by lightning, from the city of God, the papacy will be without soul, the lands will be changed by the river, and the last pope will be destroyed by the winds of heaven. This quatrain has been interpreted by some as a prediction of the end of the papacy as we know it. The reference to the great city has often been linked to Rome, the seat of the papacy, while the images of destruction and wind of heaven suggest a cataclysm that could be related to the end of the era of the papacy or the collapse of the power structures in the Church. Some interpreters believe that Nostradamus was announcing a time when the figure of the Pope, and the Church as a whole, would be stripped of their influence or even destroyed by external forces, such as revolutions or social changes. Other modern prophecies. In the 20th and 21st centuries, various contemporary mystics have claimed to receive visions or revelations related to the future of the Catholic Church and the role of the Pope in the times to come. These prophecies, although varied in their origin and content, have been seen by some as a continuation of the warnings of the past, with emphasis on the destiny of the papacy and the crisis that the Church could face in the future. Numerous mystics and visionaries, especially those with a focus on Catholic spirituality, have made predictions about the future of the papacy. Some of the best known include the visions of Saint Faustina Kowalska, the Medjugorje seer, and Vassila Ryden, among others. Saint Faustina Kowalska, in her visions, warned about a future of purification for the Church and the world, describing a time of great suffering and testing for the faithful, which could imply a crisis in the papacy. In her writings, she also refers to divine mercy as the means by which the Church will be restored after these difficult times. The apparitions of Medjugorje, which began in 1981, have also included messages about the future of the Church and the central role of the Pope in times of testing. The seers have spoken of a call to conversion and the need for the Church to remain faithful to its roots in the midst of tribulations. Vassila Ryden, a modern seer who has written several books about her mystical experiences, has spoken of a future in which the Church will go through a great crisis, with the figure of the Pope facing a spiritual and doctrinal challenge. However, in her visions, it is also foreseen that the Church will be renewed through suffering and divine intervention. According to the prophecies of these mystics, the Pope will play a crucial role in the future events of the Church. However, in many of these visions, the Pope is destined to face great challenges. The Pope will be seen as a central figure in the spiritual struggle and in the effort to maintain the unity of the Church. In times of crisis, he will be the leader who must guide the Church through the test, facing persecution, internal divisions, and external threats. In some prophecies, the Pope is described as a leader who will have to face a great apostasy, where many will turn away from the faith. This scenario implies that the Pope must be a fierce defender of the truth and Catholic doctrine, protecting the Church from doctrinal confusion and internal dissension. However, some visions also suggest that, despite the difficulties and persecutions, the Pope of the future will be instrumental in the restoration of the Church, guiding it towards a spiritual rebirth that will restore the fidelity of the faithful. The Catholic Church faces a series of challenges, both internal and external, which have tested its structure, its influence, and its relevance in the contemporary world. These problems have been reflected in scandals, the advance of secularization, and modern challenges that affect the faith and the institution itself. The Church has been shaken by a series of scandals, especially those related to sexual abuse committed by members of the clergy. These scandals have caused significant damage to the credibility of the Church, causing an increase in distrust both inside and outside the Catholic community. Investigations and cover-ups of these abuses have been controversial, leading to a crisis of morality and integrity within the institution. Externally, one of the main challenges is the growing secularization of modern societies. As more people move away from religion, the Church's influence on social and political issues has decreased considerably, especially in Western countries. This phenomenon has led to a loss of power for the Church in many parts of the world, along with a decline in mass attendance and participation in the sacraments. In addition to secularization, the Church faces other modern challenges, such as technological advances, social changes, and cultural diversity. The evolution of morality, gender issues, marriage, and LGBT rights have created tensions within the Church, which has had to adapt and respond to these issues without compromising its core doctrine. In the midst of this crisis, the election of Pope Francis in 2013 was seen as a moment of significant change for the Church. His election was met with hope, but also with skepticism, as many wondered if Francis, the first Latin American pope, would meet the expectations of renewal and restoration that many Catholics expected. Some believe that the figure of Pope Francis could align with the signs of prophecy, such as the prophecy of the popes of Saint Malachy or the visions of other mystics. In particular, the prophecy of Petrus Romanus, the last pope, has been associated with Francis by some interpretations. Some see him as the pope who will lead the Church in times of great tribulation, although others believe that the prophecy refers to a future pope yet to be elected. In any case, the election of Francis has been seen as a turning point in a period of crisis and testing for the Church. Although the papacy has lost political and social power in much of the world, the Pope remains a figure of moral and spiritual influence. Through his encyclicals and speeches, the Pope offers a vision that advocates for human rights, social justice, and world peace, which resonates beyond the limits of the Catholic Church and has relevance in a globalized context. The interpretation of the figure of the last Pope, especially within prophecies such as that of Saint Malachy or the visions of Fatima, takes on new dimensions in the context of a globalized and digital world. Throughout the centuries, certain popes seem to coincide with the descriptions given in the prophecies. For example, some claim that the characteristics of certain pontiffs fit with the words used in Nostradamus's quatrains or with the symbolic descriptions of the popes in Saint Malachy's prophecy. These coincidences are often related to personal characteristics or relevant events during the papacy, such as the emphasis on light or darkness. However, many critics point out that in numerous cases the prophecies have not been fulfilled accurately, which raises doubts about their reliability. The descriptions may be too vague in general to accurately predict the identity of future popes. Furthermore, there are inconsistencies in the interpretation of certain terms and symbols, which suggests that the prophecies may not have been made with the intention of being literal predictions. One of the main difficulties in assessing the validity of these prophecies lies in correctly interpreting the symbols and ambiguities present in them. Prophecies often employ symbolic descriptions or metaphors that can be interpreted in various ways. A pope could be described as the shepherd or the defender of the faith, but those terms are broad enough to apply to almost any pontiff. This lack of precision makes it difficult to associate real popes with the popes mentioned in the prophecies. Prophecies are also subject to temporal ambiguity. Some predictions may refer to events or situations that cannot be fully understood until they occur, which complicates the assessment of their validity. The prophecies were written in very different historical contexts, which also influences the interpretation. Often, interpretations of prophecies are made a posteriori, that is, when an event has already occurred. This implies that people tend to adjust the descriptions to fit reality, which increases subjectivity in their interpretation. The role of faith and hope in the face of prophecies and apocalyptic interpretations. Prophecies and apocalyptic interpretations surrounding the papacy, such as the prophecy of the popes of Saint Malachy or the visions of Fatima, have generated a feeling of expectation and fear regarding the future of the Church. They are often interpreted as signs of an imminent end or a great crisis. Let's not forget, The prophecy of the Black Pope is one of the most recent interpretations surrounding the prophecies about the last Pope. This concept does not come from a specific prophecy, like that of Saint Malachy, but has emerged from various contemporary theories that link the figure of the Black Pope with the end of the papacy or the apocalypse of the Catholic Church. The Black Pope in the Jesuit tradition. The term Black Pope refers to the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, as it has historically been an unofficial title due to the use of black cassocks by members of this order. This leader is not a pope in the traditional sense, as he is not the pontiff of the Catholic Church, but he has great influence due to the role of the Jesuits in education, mission, and politics within the Church. The Black Pope as a symbol of the end. The figure of the Black Pope has been associated in some modern prophecies with the last Pope, and is interpreted as a symbol of corruption or decadence in the Church. According to some theories, the Black Pope would be a figure that would represent the culmination of a series of popes that would lead to the fall of the Catholic Church. This last Pope could be interpreted as someone who leads the Church in times of great crisis or even apostasy. Relationship with the prophecy of the popes. Some defenders of this theory link the Black Pope with the concept of Petrus Romanus, the last Pope according to the prophecy of Saint Malachy. In this case, the Black Pope would be considered as the final figure that would mark the end of the papacy and, potentially, the beginning of a period of cataclysms or tribulations for the Catholic Church. In various apocalyptic interpretations, the Black Pope is seen as a symbol of spiritual darkness or a pope who, far from being an enlightened leader, would be a representative of persecution or corruption that will lead the Church towards its collapse. This Pope could be someone who embodies the errors of the Church, including its distancing from the original teachings of Christianity. Some people have speculated that, if a Black Pope were to be elected in the future, it could be a sign that the end of the papacy is near, since the figure of the Black Pope would be linked to the idea of renunciation of traditional doctrine and a turn towards an era of spiritual darkness. In summary, the future of the papacy and its relevance in the modern world are inextricably linked to the Church's ability to adapt to social, technological, and spiritual changes. Despite apocalyptic interpretations and contemporary difficulties, faith and hope remain the foundation upon which the Catholic response to crises and the uncertain future is built. The figure of the Pope, as a spiritual and moral guide, remains crucial in a world that needs guidance, especially in times of trial. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, you would help me a lot if you subscribed to the channel and gave it a like. And don't forget to leave a comment. I love reading your opinions and suggestions to continue creating content that you like. Until next time.